That morning, the cold bit through everything, my gloves, my breath, even the silence between us. Frost blurred the edges of the windshield as I slid into the passenger seat beside Patrick. The heater sputtered before humming to life, but the air still felt heavy. Still. I reached for my seatbelt, and that's when I saw it. A silk scarf on the back seat. Powder blue, embroidered with tiny flowers, folded so neatly it almost felt intentional. My fingers froze midair. "Whose scarf is that?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Patrick barely looked up, catching my reflection in the rearview mirror. "Must be the cleaning lady's," he said, casual, dismissive, like the words didn't need to hold up under weight. My heart skipped once, but not from surprise. From recognition. "Cleaning lady?" I said, turning slightly toward him. "We don't have one." He gave this awkward little laugh, the kind that trips over its own lie. "Oh, right. I meant the car wash lady." "You know, from the station." I let his words hang there, like smoke that wouldn't clear. "They wear uniforms," I said quietly. "Not silk." He turned up the heater then, pretending it was too cold, pretending not to notice how the temperature had shifted. I watched the scarf in the rearview mirror, delicate, out of place, and burning with a question I wasn't ready to ask out loud. A scarf in winter, but it felt like fire in my hands. The rest of the drive felt like walking on thin ice. Every word careful, every glance measured. Patrick started talking about brunch, about how everyone's been dying to see us, as if the scarf hadn't just slipped between our seats like a confession. I nodded, smiled when expected, even laughed once, though it sounded foreign in my own throat. My eyes kept drifting back to that powder blue. It didn't belong there. It didn't belong to me. And somehow, I already knew that mattered more than he wanted me to believe. When we arrived at the restaurant, his friends greeted us with loud voices and warm hugs, but I felt detached, like watching my life through frosted glass. Patrick was charming, of course, telling stories, making jokes, touching my shoulder just enough to perform affection. Every time he laughed, I saw the scarf folded in my mind. I could almost smell it. Faintly floral, expensive, intimate. Not something a car wash lady would wear to wipe dashboards. On the way home, he talked about the weather. I let him. My responses were polite, small, like snowflakes dissolving before they could land. Inside, though, my mind was busy stitching questions together, about the scarf, about him, about how quickly warmth can turn to suspicion. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did. Maybe that's why he kept the conversation light, floating above the truth he didn't want me to touch. That night, the house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that listens back. Patrick was in the living room, pretending to focus on a game, his laughter just a little too loud for someone paying attention. I stood in the hallway, coat still on, staring at my reflection in the dark window. My thoughts kept circling that scarf, the way it was folded. Too deliberate, too careful. Someone had placed it there, not forgotten. Placed. And he had lied with such ease, as if the truth were just another draft he could edit out. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking, like I sometimes do when things feel too still. But that blue fabric haunted me, like a quiet accusation sitting in the back seat of my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, glowing faintly against the gray winter light. It wasn't about the scarf anymore. It was about the space it revealed between who he was and who I thought he was. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I told myself I'd let it go in the morning. But deep down, I already knew I wouldn't. The scarf wasn't just a piece of silk. It was a thread. And if I pulled hard enough, I could feel the fabric of our life start to shift beneath my fingers, ready to unravel. That night, when Patrick finally went to shower, the sound of running water gave me cover. I walked quietly to the car, my breath fogging in the cold air, and opened the back door. The scarf was still there, exactly where it had been, folded too perfectly to be an accident. I picked it up, half expecting it to feel guilty. Instead, it was soft and fragrant, carrying a faint trace of lavender and something floral I didn't recognize. I held it close for a moment, like it could whisper the truth if I listened hard enough. Back inside, the house smelled like his cologne and steam. I laid the scarf flat on the kitchen table under the warm light, examining every detail, the delicate stitching, the embroidered flowers, and there, in the corner, a tiny gold monogram, the letter E. My stomach tightened. I didn't know anyone with that initial, not anyone who should have been in Patrick's car. I searched the label out of habit, Étoile Boutique. The name alone sounded expensive, secretive, foreign to my life but familiar to someone else's. I went upstairs, heard the shower stop, and tucked the scarf into my bag before he could ask. When he came out, he smiled, damp hair clinging to his forehead, and kissed my cheek like nothing had shifted. I smiled back, but something inside me had. I didn't feel like his wife in that moment. I felt like an investigator in my own home. And I wasn't ready to close the case just yet. The next morning, Patrick left early, saying he had meetings back to back. He kissed my forehead, grabbed his keys, and vanished into the cold. I stood by the window, watching the car disappear down the street, my reflection faint against the frost. That scarf still sat in my bag, humming with unanswered questions. I made coffee, tried to read, tried to be normal, but curiosity is a stubborn thing. By noon, I'd already typed Étoile Boutique Scarf Valentine's Collection into my search bar. The results were beautiful and sickeningly familiar. Each photo showed that same powder blue fabric, soft, rare, outrageously priced. But what caught my attention wasn't the cost, it was the exclusivity. Only a handful sold locally, according to a post by the boutique's manager. My chest tightened. This wasn't some random accessory. It was personal. I took a deep breath, grabbed my coat, and decided to go there myself. If he could tell stories, I could learn to fact-check them. The boutique was small and warm, smelling faintly of rosewater and polished wood. A young woman at the counter smiled as I approached, scarf in hand. "Hi," I said, my voice calm, polite. "Do you recognize this?" Her eyes lit up immediately. "Oh yes, that's from our Valentine's collection. Only a few sold around here." My pulse quickened as she typed something into her computer. Then she smiled again, unaware she was about to shatter something inside me. It was purchased by Evelyn Martin. The name hit me like a cold gust through an open door. Evelyn Martin. I'd heard it before, tossed casually into conversations about Patrick's new team. She was the one he'd praised for her fresh ideas, the one who stayed late to catch up on reports. Standing there in that boutique, the air suddenly felt thinner. I thanked the clerk, forced a polite smile, and walked out into the wind. The city noise blurred around me, but my thoughts were sharp, cutting through every excuse he'd ever given me. On the drive home, the scarf sat on the passenger seat beside me, no longer soft or elegant, just evidence. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter with every red light. I wasn't angry yet, not exactly. It was something colder, steadier, a determination I hadn't felt in years. He thought I'd accept his lie because it came wrapped in charm. But I've learned that even silk can choke when pulled tight enough. When I got home, I placed the scarf back where I'd found it, like resetting a trap. Patrick wouldn't know I'd gone digging, not yet. I wanted to see how deep his web went before cutting through it. As I turned off the light, I caught my reflection in the window again. The woman staring back didn't look betrayed. She looked awake. And for the first time in a long while, that felt powerful. That evening, I watched Patrick the way one studies a stranger pretending to be familiar. He sat across from me at dinner, chatting about his day, the fork tapping lightly against his plate like nothing was wrong. He didn't mention Evelyn, not once. Maybe he thought silence could erase her name. I smiled when appropriate, nodded at the right moments, but every word he said only stitched his lie tighter. The scarf had taught me something. When people hide things, they always overcompensate with noise. Halfway through the meal, I asked casually, "How's the new project going? Still working with Evelyn?" His fork paused for just a second, then resumed its rhythm. "Yeah, she's great," he said almost too quickly. "Brilliant, actually. Why?" I let out a soft laugh, pretending to sip my wine. "No reason, just curious." He smiled, relieved, thinking the conversation had melted away. But inside, I felt the temperature drop. Later that night, while he slept soundly beside me, I sat in the dark with my phone glowing in my hand. I opened his car's GPS history, something I'd never touched before. A list of recent destinations appeared, neat and damning. My breath caught when I saw it. The Birch Hotel. Over and over. Same day, same time. Wednesday afternoons. My hands trembled, but not from shock, from confirmation. He'd been leaving breadcrumbs, and I had finally followed them to the door. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The hum of the heater, the ticking clock, his breathing beside me. I stared at the ceiling, counting each breath until dawn. By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to accuse him without knowing every detail. Lies are like frost. They spread quietly, until they're thick enough to see. I needed to see it for myself. So, after he left for work, I sat by the kitchen window with my coffee, phone in hand, staring at the name of that hotel. My fingers hesitated only once before I pressed the call button. "Good morning," a woman's voice answered warmly. "Birch Hotel, how can I help you?" My voice came out steady, almost rehearsed. "Hi, I'm confirming a booking under the name Patrick Collins." There was a brief pause, a few clicks of a keyboard. Then she said cheerfully, "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Collins has a recurring reservation every Wednesday at 3 p.m. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat there in silence, staring into my reflection on the phone screen. The coffee had gone cold. My hands were shaking, but not out of weakness, out of realization. He hadn't just lied to me once. He'd built an entire schedule around it, a double life mapped out in digital precision. I thought of that scarf again. Delicate, beautiful, and utterly damning. It wasn't just the fabric that burned anymore. It was the knowledge that the man beside me had become someone I could no longer recognize. When Patrick came home that evening, I watched him like a scientist observing a specimen, detached, analytical, almost fascinated by his performance. He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, then launched into some story about a client dinner that hadn't happened. I smiled, nodding at all the right moments, while my mind replayed the hotel receptionist's voice. "Recurring reservation, every Wednesday, 3 o'clock. It echoed with every breath he took. He had no idea I was listening differently now, not to his words, but to what they refused to say. As we sat together on the couch, I noticed the little things I'd missed before. How his phone never left his side, how his messages arrived with a half smile he tried to hide, how he called me babe more often, as if the word could patch the distance. Every small gesture was suddenly evidence, and yet I didn't confront him. Not yet. Silence, I realized, was a far sharper weapon. It lets them dig their own grave, one excuse at a time. That night, lying beside him, I watched the moonlight spill across the sheets and thought of how cold honesty can be once you finally touch it. There was no going back to the version of us that existed before the scarf, before Evelyn, before the hotel. The frost had spread too far. Still, beneath that cold, something inside me stirred. Not rage, not sorrow, but clarity. And I knew then. The next move would be mine. The following Wednesday arrived like a storm I'd been preparing for. I woke early, brewed coffee, and pretended everything was fine. Patrick kissed me goodbye, his scent lingering longer than it should have, and said he'd be home late. Meetings all afternoon. I smiled and wished him luck, my voice soft, almost affectionate. Inside, I felt nothing but purpose. When the door closed behind him, I poured the coffee down the drain and grabbed my keys. The time for wondering was over. It was time to see the truth for myself. The roads were slick with melting snow, the sky a dull gray that seemed to mirror my mood. I parked near the Birch Hotel, far enough not to be seen. His car was already there, perfectly aligned, like everything else about his carefully curated life. My pulse slowed instead of racing. It surprised me, that stillness. Then she appeared. Evelyn. Laughing as she stepped out of his car, her scarf, that scarf, wrapped loosely around her neck. She touched his arm, and he smiled like a man who'd never known guilt. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I simply lifted my phone and started taking photos, steady, deliberate, surgical. Frame by frame, their laughter became evidence. When she leaned in to kiss him, I clicked once more, capturing the exact moment the illusion ended. It wasn't heartbreak I felt. It was release, like exhaling after holding my breath for too many winters. I'd finally seen it with my own eyes, and that made all the difference. I drove home slowly, the city blurring past my window like an afterthought. The photos sat safe in my phone, each one colder than the last. I didn't look at them again. I didn't need to. The images had already burned themselves into memory. His hand on her arm, her scarf brushing against his coat, that easy smile he used to save for me. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my anger had settled into something far more dangerous. Clarity. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to end this on my own terms. When he came home that night, his keys jingled cheerfully in the door. "Busy day," he said, shaking off his coat, his tone light. "Meetings all afternoon." I looked up from the kitchen table, forcing a gentle smile. "You must be freezing," I said softly. "Still wearing that coat you had at Birch?" His body stiffened, mid-motion, like the air had just turned to ice. He blinked. "Birch?" he echoed. "What are you talking about?" "The Birch Hotel," I said, tilting my head, almost curious. "You know, where Evelyn keeps her scarf warm." His face drained of color. I watched him swallow hard, words fumbling at his lips. "Lena, listen. Please, it's not what you think." I stood then, calm, collected, and laid my phone on the table. One tap, and the screen came to life. Photos, timestamps, proof. He stared at them like they were fire. "Funny," I said quietly. "You blamed an imaginary cleaning lady for something you dirtied yourself." He tried to speak, but every word came out fractured, tangled between guilt and panic. "Lena, please," he said, stepping toward me, hands half raised like surrender. "It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." I almost laughed. That phrase, "didn't mean anything," how easily people weaponize it to minimize betrayal. I looked at him and saw someone I no longer recognized, someone who had rehearsed deceit so often that truth had become foreign on his tongue. "You're right," I said evenly. "It doesn't mean anything now." He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. The space between us was wide and absolute. He tried another apology, softer this time, trying to sound human again. I let him talk, every excuse confirming what I already knew. He wasn't sorry for what he did, only sorry that he'd been caught. I gathered my phone, turned away, and started upstairs. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice cracking. "To wash the lies off my hands," I said without turning around. "They're starting to itch." That night, I didn't cry. Not one tear. I slept on the guest bed, listening to the wind rattle the windows, and realized something unexpected. Peace. The storm was behind me, not inside me anymore. The scarf, the lies, the pretending, all of it had served its purpose. Tomorrow I'd begin the next part. Not confrontation, but consequence. Because some truths don't need to be shouted to destroy what's already rotting. They just need to be shown. By the time morning came, my decision was already made. The sun rose pale and indifferent, spilling across a room half empty. I packed methodically, not with urgency, but precision. My clothes, my books, my favorite mug. Every item felt like a boundary reclaiming itself. Patrick was still asleep upstairs, oblivious, unaware that the silence downstairs wasn't routine anymore. On his nightstand, I left a note. Simple, neat, final. The scarf wasn't mine. The forgiveness isn't either. It was the first honest sentence between us in months. I didn't take everything. I wanted him to feel the absence, not the loss. The space where my shoes once stood, the empty side of the closet, the faint scent of my perfume on the pillow. All quiet reminders that deceit has weight. When I closed the door behind me, the air felt sharper, cleaner. The cold hit my face, but it didn't sting. It woke me. I carried only one bag, but it felt lighter than anything I'd held in years. By that afternoon, the lawyer had sent the papers. Efficient, professional, emotionless, the way truth should be delivered after so many lies. I watched the digital signature confirm, and with that single click, our story became legal dust. He called later that night, 6 missed calls in a row, but I didn't answer. He'd always mistaken attention for affection. Letting the phone ring was my first act of freedom. By the end of the week, the gossip had already started its slow crawl through his office halls. I hadn't said a single word publicly, just sent an anonymous packet to the company's ethics committee. Photos, receipts, hotel confirmations. Nothing cruel, nothing exaggerated, only the truth arranged neatly in a digital folder. It was enough. Evelyn transferred out within days, and Patrick was placed on administrative review. The phrase sounded sterile, but I knew what it really meant. Exposure. And exposure was colder than revenge. It burned longer. When he finally reached me, his voice trembled through the phone, stripped of that easy confidence. "Lena, please, you didn't have to ruin me." I almost pitied him. Almost. "Ruin you?" I said softly. "You did that when you mistook deceit for warmth." For a second, there was only the sound of his breathing, uneven and small. Then I ended the call. No shouting, no tears, no explanations. Just the quiet click of finality. Clean, irreversible. The kind of sound that echoes longer than screams. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching flakes drift through the streetlights. It was the same kind of winter that had once felt unbearable, yet now the chill steadied me. I realized revenge isn't fury. It's clarity. It's waking up and deciding the person who broke you no longer gets to narrate your pain. He'd lost control of the story, and for the first time in years, I was finally writing my own. Days passed quietly after that. No chaos, no confrontation, just stillness. The kind that feels unfamiliar after years of noise. I started sleeping through the night again, waking to the sound of birds instead of lies. My phone stayed silent, and for once, that silence was comforting. I went through my mornings slowly, brewing coffee, opening curtains, rediscovering how sunlight can feel like forgiveness. Every movement became a reminder that healing doesn't announce itself. It just starts breathing again where pain used to live. Patrick tried one last time to reach me. An email titled, "Please." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Whatever apology it carried would never outweigh the choices he'd made. Some people confuse guilt with love, and I wasn't going to be one of them. I deleted it without a second thought, feeling no guilt, no hesitation, just peace. The kind of peace that comes when you finally stop expecting truth from someone who worships lies. As I walked outside that evening, the air was crisp, the world blanketed in snow. The city lights glowed against the frost, and for the first time, I felt the season wasn't against me. Winter wasn't punishment anymore. It was proof that everything can start again. Clean, quiet, and untouched. I pulled my coat tighter and smiled to myself. The scarf that didn't belong had shown me something that finally did. My freedom. Months later, I found myself sitting by the window of a quiet cafe, watching the snow drift lazily through the air. The world moved softly now. No noise, no weight. I stirred my coffee slowly, tracing patterns in the steam, feeling the warmth settle in my chest. Across the table, my friend smiled and said, "That's a beautiful scarf, Lena. A gift?" I glanced down at it. Soft wool, my favorite shade of blue, my initials stitched delicately at the corner. "Yes," I said, returning the smile. "From me to me." It had taken time to understand that peace isn't something someone gives you. It's something you reclaim. I no longer checked my phone expecting apologies, or looked over my shoulder wondering what lie might follow me home. I'd stopped needing closure from the person who caused the wound. Sometimes the absence of their voice is the only closure you need. The world had grown colder, maybe, but I had grown warmer within it, wrapped not in silk or illusion, but in something real. Self-respect. As I finished my coffee, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman staring back looked lighter, freer. Outside, the wind carried the last traces of winter, but I no longer shivered. He had believed lies could keep him warm through the cold, but truth, quiet, steady truth, was the only fire I needed. I gathered my scarf around my neck, stepped into the snow, and smiled at the life waiting ahead.